My name is Rebecca Hollingsworth, and I turned 68 this year. I've lived my whole life in Parisburg, a small town where every stone is familiar from my childhood. The town hasn't changed much over the years, just a new shopping center on the outskirts and a couple of modern apartment complexes. But its heart, the old streets with Victorian houses, has remained the same. I've lived in one of those houses for the last 30 years. It's 2 stories high, with a small attic and a porch darkened by time. I inherited it from my parents, and it's where I raised my only son, Terrence. My antiques shop is located 2 blocks from the house, in the old former library building. Hollingsworth Treasury reads the faded sign above the entrance. Once upon a time, I graduated with a degree in history and dreamed of becoming a museum curator, but life took a different course. But now, every day, I am surrounded by history, encapsulated in old things, the shabby bindings of books, the dull gleam of silver, the graceful curves of furniture from bygone eras. For the past 3 years, I have lived alone. My second husband, Walter Price, died of a heart attack at the age of 72. We lived together for almost 20 years. Quiet, cozy, devoid of passion, but filled with mutual respect and warmth. Walter was a professor of literature, a quiet, thoughtful man whose world consisted of books and unhurried conversations over evening tea. He accepted Terence as family, though my son, already a teenager by then, never called him father. Terence's real father, Rowan Hollingsworth, left us when my son was 12. I remember that day in great detail: the gray October sky, the drizzling rain, and Rowan with his suitcase at the door. Rebecca, I'm suffocating here. This city, this life, it's all suffocating me. He'd always been restless, always looking for adventure, new horizons. We met when I was still a student. He came to our town to work as a photographer for the local newspaper, planning to stay for a couple of months. He ended up staying for 13 years, but was never able to put down roots. It took Terence a long time to forgive his father. As a teenager, it was as if he was trying to fill a void inside himself, playing sports to the point of exhaustion, reading books about travel and adventure, as if he hoped through the pages to come into contact with the side of life his father had chosen. I saw this pain in my son's eyes and did everything I could to make him feel loved. Over time, the wound healed. Terence grew up to be a sensible, calm young man, the complete opposite of his father. He graduated with a degree in economics, got a job as a financial analyst in a large company, and slowly but surely moved up the career ladder. I was proud of him, his determination, his reliability. He came to my house for lunch every Sunday, even when he moved to his own apartment in another part of town. That all changed when Prudence Abbott came into his life. They'd met at some corporate conference. She worked as a presenter at business events. Tall, with a perfectly straight back and chiseled features, Prudence immediately struck me as too cold for my son. There was a calculating quality about her, a look that assessed everything around her, as if estimating value. Perhaps it was professional. Years of public speaking had taught her to keep a perfect smile. But I sensed there was something else behind that smile. Terence was 42 at the time, Prudence 33. The difference in age didn't seem significant, but in experience and outlook, they were from different universes. My son is domestic, a little naive, accustomed to a certain way of life. She is bright, ambitious, with sharp elbows. At first, Prudence was a sweetheart. She called me Becky's mom, took an interest in my shop, even asked to see rare copies of books. "You have such exquisite taste," Becky's mom. Now I realize who Terence is so refined into, but her compliments were always false, like cheap costume jewelry trying to pass itself off as real jewelry. They married after a year of acquaintance. It was a lavish, lavish wedding, not my son's style, who had always preferred a private affair. But Prudence insisted, and Terrence gave in. I remember how he looked that day, happy but a little stunned, as if he didn't fully understand what was happening. After the wedding, they bought a house in an upscale neighborhood in Parisburg. Too big and expensive for the two of them, but Prudence said they had to match it. Terrence started working more, staying late. Our Sunday lunches became monthly and then became a rarity. Sorry, Mom. We have an important meeting with Prudence's clients today. Sorry, we promised we'd stop by her parents' house. Next time, okay? Prudence has a migraine. She needs to rest. More and more often, I heard these excuses, and more often, Prudence's name came up as the reason for our separation. When they did come, my sister-in-law found ways to show her superiority. Sometimes it was subtle gestures, a condescending smile when I talked about my clients, a slight sigh when I offered my homemade cookies instead of the fancy bakery cakes. Sometimes a direct comment. Rebecca, you'd update your closet. These clothes look so vintage and not in a good way, she said once, eyeing my favorite blouse. Terrence said you're an excellent cook, but I must admit I was expecting something a bit more exquisite. This was said after dinner, where I served my signature apple pie from my grandmother's recipe. God, how can you live amongst all this junk? It smells like the dust of ages in here. That's about my house, every object in which holds my family's history. I tried not to pay attention, wrote it all off to the difference in generations, to her urban upbringing, to the fact that she simply does not understand the value of tradition. But with each visit, the jabs grew more painful and my patience grew thinner. Terrence never stood up for me. He either pretended not to hear his wife's remarks or awkwardly changed the subject. Occasionally, something akin to shame would flicker in his eyes, but he'd look away. My boy, who had once been so sensitive, had become an unresponsive shadow around this woman. One day, as they were about to leave after another strained visit, I tried to talk to my son alone. Terrence, hold on a minute, please, I asked when Prudence was already out on the porch. He stopped in the doorway, glancing nervously over his shoulder. What is it, Mom? We're in a hurry. Son, I just wanted to ask if you're okay. You've become so different. He tensed, lips pressed into a thin line. What do you mean? It's like you're afraid to say an extra word in front of Prudence. She often says things that hurt me, and you don't say a word. Mom, don't start, please. A note of irritation came into his voice. Prudence is just straightforward. She doesn't want to offend anyone. Terrence, Prudence's impatient voice came from the street. Are you coming or not? Coming, he shouted, and turning to me, added quietly, I'll call you in the week. He did not call. Gradually, our meetings became quite rare. On big holidays or family dates, Teppers looked more and more tired, often silent, while Prudence shone in conversation. She had started her own business, an event management agency, and now every meeting we had turned into a monologue about important clients and successful projects. I watched my son grow more and more distant from me, his personality eroded by this woman. My Terrence, who had once loved quiet evenings with a book, was now caught up in an endless merry-go-round of social events and business dinners. Prudence molded him into what she thought was right, a successful businessman with an ambitious wife, part of a certain circle, and he let her do it. On the day of my 68th birthday, I waited for them for dinner. I set the table in the living room, prepared Terrence's favorite dishes, and got out the good wine I kept for special occasions. An hour before the appointed time, the bell rang. Mom, I'm sorry, but we won't be able to make it. Terrence's voice sounded guilty. Prudence had an emergency with an important client. I remained silent, clutching the phone receiver. Mom, are you there? Yes, I can hear you, Terrence, I finally answered. Well, business is business. We'll stop by next week, I promise. I knew that wasn't going to happen. After that call, I sat at the set table in the empty room for a long time, looking at the cooling food and the unlit candles. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. Not just a woman living alone, but a person who had lost the most important connection in life. That night, I pulled out an old photo album, pictures of Terrence at different ages, a smiling toddler on a tricycle, a serious first grader with a huge bouquet, a frowning teenager who didn't want to be photographed, a proud university graduate. On the last pages are photos from a wedding. Terrence in an austere suit, with a frozen smile, and next to Prudence in a lavish dress, glowing with triumph, as if she had won the grand prize. Looking at these pictures, I thought about Rowan. Where is he now? How has his life turned out? Does he know that his son has turned into an unwilling puppet in the hands of a calculating woman? Rowan, for all his faults, always had a backbone, always stayed true to himself. He left because he couldn't live any other way. Terrence, on the other hand, seemed to dissolve into other people's expectations, lost himself. That night I dreamed of Rowan, young as I remembered him, with windswept hair and laughing eyes. He stood on our doorstep and said, "It can still be fixed, Becky. Just don't give up." Tuesday was always a quiet day in my antique shop. I usually use this time to inventory and put new arrivals in order. That day, I was sorting through a collection of vintage postcards I had purchased the previous week from a collector's widow. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass window made fanciful patterns on the worn wooden floor, and dust danced in the air, making the atmosphere almost unreal, as if frozen in time. The bell above the door jingled melodiously, announcing a visitor. Without lifting my head from my work, I said my usual greeting. "Welcome to the Hollingsworth Treasury. If you need any help, I'm at your service." Hollingsworth Treasury. The voice that said those words made me freeze. "I always thought that sounded too pretentious for you, Becky." I looked up slowly. Standing in the doorway was a man I hadn't seen in 33 years. Gray hair instead of brown, wrinkles around his eyes, but the same smile, a slightly crooked smile with the right corner of his lips turned up, and the same eyes the color of stormy seas. "Rowan," I breathed out, feeling the room spin slightly around me. The man himself, he took a few steps forward, looking around with undisguised curiosity. "Impressive. You always had a way of creating a special atmosphere." It took me a few seconds to come to my senses. So many years had passed. So much water had passed. And he just walked into my life like he was going out for 5 minutes to get a cigarette. "What are you doing here?" My voice sounded muffled, as if from far away. Rowan walked over to the display case with the antique clock, ran his finger along the glass. "He's back. For good, I think. Bought a little house on Oakwood Street, in Parisburg. After all these years." He turned to me, and the expression on his face was the same one I remembered so well, a mixture of wistfulness and slight sadness. "You know, I've traveled halfway around the world, Becky. I've lived in Paris, Barcelona, Cape Town, Bangkok. I've photographed everything that moves and doesn't move. I've published 3 photo albums, won a couple awards. And recently I realized that I want to go back to where I started. Maybe it's the age, maybe it's something else." He stopped talking, looking at me expectantly. But what could I say? That I was glad to see him? That everything was forgiven and forgotten? That 33 years was enough time to heal the wound of his departure? "You look good," I finally said a neutral phrase. "So do you," he smiled wider. "Time has been kind to you." "Time is never kind to anyone, Rowan. It's just less cruel to some." He nodded, accepting my rebuke. "Fair enough. Look, Becky." He hesitated, as if searching for words. "I know you don't just show up after all these years. I know I have no right to ask for anything. but I'd like to talk. Maybe over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. I stared at this man so familiar and so foreign at the same time and tried to sort through my feelings. The anger I'd nurtured for so long hadn't gone away, but it was quieter, like the distant thunder of a storm. Curiosity, certainly, but there was something else, too, a strange sense of incompleteness, as if I'd been holding the door ajar all these years, not letting it slam shut or open completely. I close at 6, I said, surprised at my own decision. You can come in if you want. I have wine at home. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, but he got over himself quickly. Dash. Thank you, Becky. I'll be there. After he left, I couldn't concentrate on work. My mind raced like crazy, jumping from memories of our life together to wondering how Terrence would react when he found out his father was back. Would he be angry, happy, indifferent? At 6 o'clock, I closed the shop and headed home, wondering if Rowan would even show up. Part of me hoped he wouldn't show up, that it was a passing curiosity, and that tomorrow he'd disappear from my life again. But the other part, the part I tried not to think about, was waiting for him to show up. Rowan arrived at 7 sharp with a bottle of red wine and a bouquet of wildflowers, nothing fancy, just daisies and bells, picked, it seemed, from the nearest meadow. I remember you used to love these, he said, holding it out to me. You said roses were too flashy. I grinned, accepting the flowers. It's amazing that you remembered that. I remember a lot of things, Becky. We walked to the living room, where I'd managed to set a small table, cheese, fruit, bread. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep me from drinking wine on an empty stomach. For the first half hour, the conversation was awkward, intermittent. We talked about the weather, about how Parisberg had changed over the years, about my shop. Avoided the main topics, his leaving, our son, anything that really mattered. But gradually, with each sip of wine, the tension eased. Rowan talked about his travels, the countries he'd visited, the people he'd photographed. His eyes lit up when he described a sunrise over the ruins of an ancient temple in Cambodia or a sunset in the Namib Desert. He always had a knack for telling stories, making the listener see everything through his eyes. What about you? He finally asked. How has your life been since after I left? I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. It wasn't easy at first. Terrence was very upset, withdrawn. I got a job at the antique store, then inherited it from the owner. I married a second time to Walter Price, a literature professor. He died 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Rowan said quietly. I shrugged. Life is like that. We had some good years together. And Terrence? What did he grow up to be? There it was, the moment of truth. I looked Rowan straight in the eye. Serious, reliable, responsible, the exact opposite of you. Works as a financial analyst. Married. Rowan lowered his gaze, fiddling with his glass. I was trying to find information on him when I decided to come back. I know he works at Meridian Financials. Saw his picture on the company website, he said quietly. He has your eyes. And your chin, I added involuntarily. Do you think he'd want to see me? I honestly wondered about that question. Terrence had never talked about his father in recent years, as if the subject were taboo. But in his study, I knew there was a picture of a 3-year-old Terrence sitting on Rowan's shoulders, the only picture of his father he'd kept. I don't know, I finally answered. But I think he has a right to know you're back. Rowan nodded, grateful for my honesty. I'd like to meet him, explain, though there's nothing to explain, just to see him, to see what kind of man he's become. Maybe a family dinner? I suggested it, surprised at my own words. In a neutral setting, here at my house. I'll invite Terrence and his wife, and you can come. Are you sure that's a good idea? I could hear the doubt in his voice. No, I answered honestly. But I don't have any other ideas. And I'd rather do it now than wait until you two run into each other somewhere in the city. We agreed on a date in 2 weeks on Saturday. I promised to call Terrence and convince him to come without revealing the reason. When Rowan left, I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the empty glass. What am I doing? Why am I letting this man back into our lives? Wouldn't it lead to more wounds? But deep down, I knew the answer. Terrence deserved a chance to see his father, to say all the things that had built up over the years, to maybe find some semblance of peace. And well, I'd learned to live my life without Rowan Hollingsworth a long time ago. The next day, I called my son. Terrence, it's Mom. How are you? Hi, Mom. He sounded tired. I'm fine, just a lot of work. I'm sorry I haven't stopped by lately. It's okay, I understand, I lied. Listen, I wanted to invite you and Prudence over for dinner next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a family night. Saturday? He was obviously mentally checking his schedule. I think we can make it. I just need to check with Prudence to see if she has any plans. Of course, I said, trying to hide my annoyance that my son couldn't accept an invitation from his mother without consulting his wife. It would be nice to see you. What's the occasion of the dinner? He asked with a touch of suspicion. I hesitated. I couldn't tell the truth over the phone. I just missed you. And there's something I'd like to talk to you about in person. Is something wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine, Terrence. Just, come over, okay? After some hesitation, he agreed, promising to call back when he'd checked with Prudence. He called back the next day. Mom, about Saturday. He started hesitantly. My heart sank. Was it a no? Prudence had a client meeting scheduled, but she rescheduled it, he continued to my surprise. So we'll be there, 6 p.m. as usual? Yeah, 6 would be great. I couldn't hide the relief in my voice. What's going on? Terrence insisted. You seem weird. I'm fine, really. I'll tell you when I see you. After the conversation, I stared at my phone, thinking about the evening ahead. Terrence confronting his father after all these years. How would he react? How would Prudence behave in this situation? And what would happen next? The next few days passed in a state of nervous anticipation. I called Rowan twice, confirming our plans. He seemed as anxious as I was. What should I tell him, Becky? He asked during our last conversation before dinner. How do I explain 33 years of absence? I don't know, Rowan. Maybe just the truth? That you couldn't live any other way, that you had to leave to find yourself. That sounds terribly selfish. It was. I wasn't going to feel sorry for him. You chose yourself over your family. It was your choice. Yes, he agreed quietly. And I have to take responsibility for it. I hadn't slept much in anticipation of Saturday. Thoughts of the upcoming meeting haunted me constantly. How would Terrence react? Was it too cruel of me to arrange this meeting without warning? And what if things didn't go as I hoped? On Thursday, 2 days before the scheduled dinner, Prudence dropped by my shop unexpectedly. It was unusual. She had never come to me alone, without Terrence. Rebecca? She looked around the room with an appraising eye. What an atmospheric shop you have here. To what do I owe this visit? I wasted no time in making small talk. Prudence walked between the display cases, looking at the exhibits with feigned interest. I was just passing through, so I thought I'd stop by. We don't see each other much these days. You're never passing through, Prudence. You always have a purpose. She smiled, acknowledging my hit. Okay, you're right. I was wondering what mysterious conversation you had planned for Saturday. Terrence is worried. And he sent you to scout it out? Oh no, she grinned. He doesn't know anything about my visit. Think of it as, female solidarity. I just want to be prepared for anything that might affect our plans. What plans? Prudence moved closer, lowering her voice, though there was no one else in the shop but us. Terrence and I are thinking of moving. Chicago or maybe New York. He's been offered a promotion to head office. I felt a chill go through me. A move? Terrence didn't mention it the last time we spoke. When were you planning on telling me? Oh, we're still considering the options. She made an indefinite gesture with her hand. Nothing concrete yet. But if you have health problems or anything else that might keep Terrence here, it would be fair to know about it in advance. I was struck by her calculating nature, not concern for her mother-in-law, but cold calculation. What could possibly interfere with their plans? My health is fine. Thank you for your concern, I said dryly. And as for the rest, you'll hear on Saturday with Terrence. Prudence was clearly unhappy with my answer, but she hid it behind another fake smile. Whatever you say, Rebecca, we'll look forward to your revelations. After she left, I sat staring into space, moving. So Prudence had finally managed to convince Terrence to completely cut himself off from his roots, from me, from everything that connected him to Parisburg. No wonder she'd been so insistent on my health, looking for potential obstacles to her plans. Strangely, the news only strengthened my resolve to arrange a meeting between Terrence and my father. Let him see that there was always a choice between escape and return, that even after decades of absence, one can find a way home. On Saturday, I set about getting ready for dinner first thing in the morning. I picked out the best tablecloth, got good china and silverware. I made a roast, Terrence's favorite dish since childhood, an apple pie from my grandmother's recipe. Rowan was to arrive an hour later than Terrence and Prudence. We'd decided that I'd get my son ready first and then call my ex-husband. At 5 o'clock, I was all ready and just walked around the house checking that everything was in order. At 6:30, Rowan called. Dash Becky? How are you? Nervous, I admitted honestly. Are you? Terrible, he laughed softly. I feel like I'm studying for an exam I didn't study for. Look, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe we should talk to him alone first, without witnesses. Teepers is coming with his wife, so we can't do it alone anyway, I objected. Besides, we've already decided everything. I'll meet you at 7, like we agreed. I felt strangely calm after I'd talked to Rowan. Whatever happened tonight would be the beginning of something new for all of us. Saturday was surprisingly clear after a week of rain. The sunlight streaming through the windows filled my house with warm golden light, creating a deceptive atmosphere of coziness and tranquility. I spent the morning and half the afternoon preparing for the evening, cooking a roast from an old family recipe, baking the apple pie Terrence had loved as a child, setting the dining room table with the best tablecloths and dishes. I wanted everything to be perfect, even though I was well aware that no amount of serving would soften the upcoming meeting. An hour before Terrence and Prudence arrived, I changed into a navy blue dress that I thought made me look younger. I meticulously styled my hair and put on lipstick. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I thought I looked more like a woman preparing for a date than a mother waiting for her son and daughter-in-law. Maybe Prudence wasn't so wrong in her suspicions. Maybe there really is a part of me still clinging to the past. I pushed those thoughts away. Tonight wasn't about me and Rowan. It was about Terrence, who deserved a chance to meet his father, to say what he'd been saying for years. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and went to open the door, mentally repeating the speech I'd prepared. Terrence stood on the doorstep in a smart suit, as if he'd come for a business meeting rather than a dinner at his mother's house. Next to him was Prudence, as impeccable as ever, in an elegant beige dress, with perfect hair and makeup. Mom. Terrence leaned over to hug me, but the hug was formal, quick, without real warmth. Rebecca. Prudence held out her hand for a handshake, smiling her trademark smile that didn't involve her eyes. What a lovely dress. Vintage? I ignored the jab, letting them into the house. Come on in. Everything is ready. I'm so happy to see you. Terrence looked around at the table, the flowers in the vase, the candles. It looked solemn. Any special occasion? You could say that, I said evasively, motioning for them to sit down. But let's have dinner first. I made your favorite roast. Oh, you shouldn't have gone to all that trouble, Prudence interjected. We're going to the new restaurant after dinner, so we won't be too hungry. A new restaurant? I looked at my son questioningly. You didn't tell me you had other plans for tonight. It was a spontaneous decision, Terrence explained, looking slightly embarrassed. Prudence wanted to show me this place for a possible collaboration with her agency. Saturday night? I couldn't hide the skepticism in my voice. Business doesn't recognize weekends, Rebecca. Prudence smiled sweetly. But don't worry, we won't run away from your surprise, whatever it is. I put the roast on plates, poured the wine. Terrence seemed to relax a little, smelling the familiar flavor from his childhood. Prudence, on the other hand, just picked at her food with her fork, as if she feared that each bite would add to her caloric intake. So, Mom, Terrence began after a few moments of silence, you said you had something you wanted to talk about? I took a deep breath. The moment had come. Yes, Terrence. There's something important I need to tell you. I paused, searching for words. The thing is, I've invited someone else here tonight. He's coming over later. Who? Terrence frowned, and Prudence stepped forward with genuine curiosity. Oh, Rebecca, do you have a boyfriend? She shook her hands in a playful way. At your age, it's so sweet. I ignored her remark, looking straight at my son. Terrence, your father's back in Parisburg. He's here, and he wants to see you. There was a silence so deep you could hear the old clock ticking in the living room. Terrence's face was petrified, his eyes wide with shock. My father? He finally said in a hoarse voice. Rowan? I nodded. He came to my shop last week. He's back in town for good, bought a house, and he's dying to meet you. After 33 years? There was a hint of anger in Terrence's voice, and you just, invited him over without me knowing? I thought it would be better this way, I tried to explain. On neutral ground with preparation? Better for who? My son interrupted me. For you? For him? Certainly not for me. Terrence, please. I reached across the table, but he pulled away. I just wanted to give you both a chance to talk, to close this chapter. You didn't think to ask me? His voice rose. Maybe I don't want to see him. Maybe I'm fine living without the man who left us. Oh, I understand. Prudence intervened with a venomous smile. Old love never rusts, does it, Rebecca? It's a romantic story. A jilted woman waits 30 years for her wanderer and then finally does. Prudence. Terrence shushed her, but without much conviction. What? I'm just stating the obvious. Your mother never really let him go, so she took the chance when he came back. I felt the color flood my cheeks from anger, not embarrassment. You don't know anything about my relationship with Rowan. I gritted my teeth. Where is he now, the prodigal father? Terrence asked, ignoring our exchange of barbs. I took a deep breath. He should be here in half an hour. I wanted to talk to you first, to prepare. Great, he pushed his plate away abruptly. That's great. Not only are you arranging this meeting without my consent, but you're tricking me into it. It's not trickery, Terrence. I tried to defend myself. I just didn't want to talk on the phone. These things have to be discussed in person. You know what the funny thing is? Terrence shook his head. All my life you've convinced me that he abandoned us, that he didn't care, and now you're giving him a warm welcome when he shows up. That's not true, I countered. I just thought you both deserved a chance to talk, to set the record straight. When did you become so understanding? There was bitterness in his voice. The last time I saw my father, you were shouting at him that he was a worthless egomaniac and that he should go to hell. It hurt, Terrence. He left us when you were only 12. Of course I was angry. What about me? I was hurt too, but you never asked me if I wanted to see him. Not then, not now. Terrence, I tried to speak calmly, even though I was seething inside. I just wanted what was best. You can always leave if you don't want to see him. No one's holding you back. Prudence, who'd been watching our argument with undisguised amusement, intervened again. What a touching family scene. You know, Terrence, maybe it's for the best. Before we move in, you can put all the old scores to rest. Moving? I looked from Prudence to my son. What is she talking about? Terrence gave his wife a disgruntled look, but she just shrugged her shoulders innocently. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you'd already told your mother. Told me what? I insisted. Terrence sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I'd been offered a promotion to head office in Chicago. And you accepted? Without discussing it with me? What's there to discuss, Mom? He sounded annoyed. This is my career, my life. I don't have to consult with you on everything. Of course you don't. I tried to keep my voice even, though my insides were clenching with pain. It would just be polite to inform me of such an important decision. We were just about to tell you, Prudence interjected, but you and your surprise beat us to it. I looked at the woman, a well-groomed woman with perfect manicures and a fake smile, and suddenly I felt like I couldn't hold back any longer. You. I pointed my finger at her. You've been purposely distancing him from me. From the very beginning, from the moment you met him. Every word you say, every gesture you make is designed to drive a wedge between us. Mom, Terrence exclaimed, what are you talking about? The truth. I kept my eyes on Prudence, who was staring at me with undisguised contempt. She's manipulating you, don't you see? Isolating you from your family, from your roots, pushing you to make decisions that only benefit her. It's ridiculous. Prudence rolled her eyes theatrically. Terrence, tell your mother she's deluded. Misguided? I laughed bitterly. Who's always finding reasons not to come to family dinners? Who's always rushing to leave as soon as they step foot in my house? Who insists on moving to another city, away from me? Maybe Terrence would rather spend time with me than with a woman who can't let go of the past, Prudence countered. Who's still clinging to the man who left her 30 years ago? That's enough. Terrence held up his hand. Both of you, please stop. No, Terrence, I won't stop. I turned to my son. Can't you see what's happening? She's changing you, making you a different person. You've never been so cold, so detached. You were always sensitive, attentive. And now you don't even notice how she talks to me, how she humiliates me in my own house. Nobody's humiliating you, Mom. Terrence looked tired. You're just too sensitive. Prudence is direct. That's her way of talking. Straightforward? I couldn't believe my ears. When she calls my house a junk museum, when she says my clothes look vintage and not in a good way, when she insinuates that it's too late to have a personal life at my age, that's not directness, Terrence. That's disrespect. Mom, you're exaggerating. He shook his head. Prudence is just joking, and you're taking it personally. Because it's not a joke. I raised my voice. These are deliberate jabs, constant, methodical. And the worst part is, you don't see it, or you don't want to see it. You see, darling? Prudence intervened, putting her hand on her husband's shoulder. I told you your mother was jealous. She can't bear to see you living your own life without her control. It's not jealousy, I countered. It's the pain of my son letting some woman to insult his mother. Some woman? Prudence theatrically put her hand to her chest. I am his wife. Unfortunately, I muttered. What did you say? Terence leaned across the table toward me, a dangerous glint in his eyes. I said unfortunately. I repeated louder, because she's not the kind of woman I'd want to be around you. She's calculating, cold, and all she wants is the status you give her. How dare you? Terence stood up abruptly, knocking over a chair. You know nothing about our relationship. I know enough. I stood up too. I see how she treats you, how she makes decisions for you, how she isolates you from your family. Terence, Prudence stood up too, her voice suddenly soft, almost pitiful. I can't listen to this anymore. Your mother is clearly not herself. Maybe we should leave. Unhinged? I laughed. Oh, I know exactly what's going on. You're the one playing the victim to manipulate him. And it's working. Look at him. He's willing to defend you even when you insult his mother. That's enough. Terence slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. You're out of line, Mom. Me? I said indignantly. What about her? She can say whatever she wants, and I'm supposed to keep quiet? She never said anything about you that you're saying about her now. Because she's smarter than that, Terence. She does it subtly, without you noticing. And I'm just calling things by their proper names. Prudence sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands as if trying to hold back tears. The perfect victim. Terence, she said in a shaky voice, I never realized your mother hated me so much. I don't, I corrected her. I see right through you. There's a difference. Terence walked over to his wife and put his arm around her shoulders. It's okay, honey. Mom's just upset about Dad coming back. She didn't mean what she said. Oh, that's exactly what I meant, I protested, every word. And you know what the saddest part is? That you don't see how she's using you, how she's making you into a puppet. Mom, stop, Terrence's voice was threatening. Why? Does it really hurt? Look at you. You're a shadow next to her. You can't even accept an invitation from your own mother without her approval. I'm warning you. Terence took a step toward me, his face contorted with anger. What? What are you going to do? I didn't back down. Leave? Then leave. Run like your father. It runs in the family, running away from problems instead of solving them. It was too much. I could see it in his eyes a second before it happened. Terence took 2 steps between us and slapped me across the face. Not with a fist, with an open palm, but no less painful. The sound of the slap echoed through the room. I froze, pressing my hand to my burning cheek, unable to believe what had just happened. My son, my boy I'd raised, had hit me. Terence, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. He looked shocked at what he'd done, looking at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. Mom, he began, but Prudence interrupted him, jumping up from her seat. Don't apologize. Her voice rang with triumph. She had earned it with her insults. Terence turned to his wife as if awakening from a trance. Prudence, I hit my mother. It's unforgivable. She drove you to it. Prudence walked over to me, looking down at me with undisguised superiority. I'm in charge of this house, and the sooner you realize that, Rebecca, the better for all of us. At that moment, the front door swung open. Rowan appeared in the dining room, a bouquet of flowers in his hands, a smile that faded when he saw the scene before him. Me with a red cheek, Terence with a look of horror on his face, Prudence triumphant. What's going on here? His voice was quiet, but you could feel the steel in it. Terence turned slowly toward the door, looking into his father's face for the first time in 33 years. Dash, Dad? The word sounded strange, uncertain, as if Terrence was tasting it after a long time of oblivion. Rowan shifted his gaze from his son to me, noticed the bump on my cheek, and his face changed. The smile he'd come in with was replaced by an expression of cold fury. "I'm asking you again," he said, taking a step into the room. "What? Here. Happening?" The silence that hung in the room after Rowan's question felt palpable. I stood, still pressing my palm to my burning cheek, unable to believe my own son had raised his hand against me. Terrence froze, staring at his father with an expression that was a mix of shock, shame, and something else. Maybe a childhood resentment buried 30 years ago, but never truly gone. Prudence took a step back, her triumphant smile replaced by wariness. "Daddy," Terrence finally said, and the word sounded strange in his mouth, unfamiliar, like a foreign word. "You're really are back." Rowan slowly placed the bouquet on the nearest chair, keeping his eyes on his son. "Yes, I'm back, and just in time, by the looks of it." He looked back at me. "Becky, are you okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. My cheek hurt, but it was more heartbreaking to realize that my son, my own flesh and blood, could do this to me. What happened here? Rowan took another step into the room, his eyes flicking from me to Terrence and back again. "A family discussion," Prudence interjected, trying to regain control of the situation. "A little out of control, but nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" Rowan looked at her with such cold contempt that she involuntarily took another step back. "I see a blow mark on the face of the woman who raised my son, and you say it's nothing serious?" She doesn't know what she's talking about. I finally found my voice. "There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Rowan shook his head. "Becky, don't defend him. I saw enough through the window before I came in." Terrence flinched, his face turning even paler. "You saw?" "Yes, I saw you hit your mother." Rowan took another step toward his son, and though he was no longer young, there was a strength in his posture that made Terrence step back. "Saw the way that woman?" He nodded toward Prudence, looked at it with a smile, and saw the look of pain and disbelief on Becky's face. "You don't understand," Terrence began. "You don't know what happened here before you came." "Then explain." Rowan crossed his arms over his chest. "Explain what words, what actions could justify a son raising his hand against his own mother." Terrence looked helplessly back at Prudence, as if seeking support, but she stared at Rowan silently, assessing the situation. She insulted Prudence." Terrence finally said. "She said terrible things about my wife, about our relationship." "And that's grounds for violence?" Rowan shook his head. "I don't recognize you, son. The boy I remember would never raise a hand against a woman, much less his own mother." "The boy you remember?" There was a bitterness in Terrence's voice. "Don't you think you lost the right to judge me when you left and didn't come back for 33 years? "Perhaps," Rowan agreed with sudden calm. "I did lose that right, but this isn't about me. It's about what you did today. It's about what you let yourself hit the man who's been by your side all these years while I've been gone." "Don't lecture me," Terrence snapped. "You're the last person I want to hear it from." "All right," Rowan nodded. "Then let's talk about this another way. Do you remember how you felt when I left?" Terrence looked away, but Rowan continued. "You were angry, confused, feeling betrayed and abandoned. I know this because your mother wrote to me for the first few months, trying to get me to come back. She described how you'd sit by the window in the evenings, waiting for me to come back, how you refused to talk to the school counselor, how you cried at night, thinking she couldn't hear." "Shut up," Terrence hissed, but Rowan didn't stop. "Do you know what she did? She took a second job so you could keep going to the same private school you went to before I left. She gave up her own life, the career she could have built to be there for you. She never spoke ill of me in your presence, even though she had every right to. She always put you first. I said, shut up. Terrence turned sharply, his face contorted with anger. You don't know anything about our life after you left. I know enough, Rowan replied calmly. I know that your mother did her best to raise you to be a good man, despite my leaving. And from what I've seen today, she succeeded, until recently. What happened to you, Terrence? What turned the caring boy I remembered into a man capable of hitting his own mother? Terrence was silent, his shoulders tense, his fists clenched. I could see him struggling with his emotions: anger, shame, pain. Would you stop this farce? Prudence intervened suddenly, her voice cold and calculating. You come back after 30 years away and you think you can lecture us? Who do you think you are? Rowan turned toward her, and in his gaze I saw something I'd never noticed before: absolute icy contempt. I imagine myself as a man who made a terrible mistake years ago, he said quietly. A man who regretted his decision every day, but was too proud and too cowardly to go back and admit it. I don't claim to be a model father or husband, but I do know for a fact that Rebecca doesn't deserve to be treated this way. Not from anyone, much less her own son. Rowan, I've finally found my voice. Please, let's all just calm down. It was a misunderstanding. I said things I shouldn't have said. Don't make excuses for him, Becky. Rowan shook his head. Whatever you said is no excuse for violence. Enough, Terrence straightened sharply, his voice ringing with tension. I will not stand here and be lectured by a man who abandoned us without a word, who didn't even try to contact me all these years, who missed my graduation, my wedding, my whole damn life. You're right, Rowan agreed abruptly. I have no right to judge you. I've been a terrible father. But that doesn't change the fact that you just hit your mother, the woman who's been by your side your whole life, who never abandoned you, unlike me. Terrence stared at his father for a long moment, conflicting emotions struggling in his eyes. Then he turned to me. Mom, his voice trembled. Yeah, Terrence, let's go. Prudence took his hand firmly. There's nothing more for us to do here. To my surprise, Terrence didn't resist. He let Prudence pull him toward the exit, only giving me one last look, a confused one, full of unspoken emotion. You won't even apologize to your mother? Rowan asked quietly as they passed him. Terrence stopped, turned to me. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to be. I don't know what came over me. Before I could answer, Prudence pulled him with her. Come on, Terrence. You don't have to make excuses. She provoked the situation, and they left. The front door slammed, followed by the sound of the engine starting. I was left standing in the middle of the dining room, feeling empty and cold inside. Rowan walked over to me, taking my hand gently. Becky, are you okay? Should I put some ice on it? I shook my head, feeling tears come to my eyes. I'm fine. It's just, I never thought I'd see the day when my son would lay a hand on me. It's not your fault. Rowan gently guided me to a chair and helped me sit down. That woman, she has some kind of power over him. I've seen it before. She's manipulating him. I sighed. I've tried to tell him that, but he doesn't listen. He always takes her side, even when she's clearly wrong. Rowan poured me some wine, then sat down across from me. How long has this been going on? Since the beginning of their relationship. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my body. At first, it was the little things: canceled visits, shortened calls. Then she started making these little venomous remarks about my house, my clothes, my lifestyle, and Terrence didn't seem to notice, or pretended not to notice. And today, I couldn't take it. I shook my head. When she told me that they were moving to Chicago without even consulting me, I snapped, told Terrence everything I thought about her, how she was changing him, pulling him away from me. And he hit you, Rowan finished quietly. Yeah, I closed my eyes. I'd never seen him so alien, like he wasn't my son. We sat in silence for a few minutes, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Then Rowan asked quietly, "Are you mad at me, Becky?" I looked at him, surprised by the question. Why? Everything, he said with his arms. For leaving. For not coming back when he should have. For leaving you alone. I thought about it, trying to sort through my feelings. Was I angry with Rowan? Sure, 30 years ago I'd been furious. Then came bitterness, then humility. And now? No, I finally answered. I'm not angry, not anymore. Too much water has passed. I should have come back sooner, he said, staring into his glass. Should have been here for you, for Terrence. Maybe, I shrugged, but you would have been miserable here in Parisburg. You always dreamed of more, of adventure, of a world outside this town. You were suffocating here. That's no excuse. Rowan shook his head. I was selfish, thinking only of myself, of my own desires. Not about you, not about our son. Yes, you were selfish, I didn't argue. But you know what I've learned over the years? Sometimes it's better to be with someone who's honest about their selfishness than someone who pretends to be selfless, but is really just manipulating you in a different way. Rowan looked at me in surprise. You've changed, Becky. You've become wiser, just older. I smiled weakly. 30 years is a long time. We were silent again, but it wasn't the tense silence of before. It was more like a thoughtful pause between two people who'd been through a lot and were trying to make sense of the present. Tell me about your life, I asked, about what you've been doing all these years. And Rowan told me about his travels around the world, the pictures he'd taken, the people he'd met, about the times when he had to sleep on the floor in hostels and the occasions when his work was exhibited in prestigious galleries, about the women in his life, none of whom he stayed with for long, always moving on, about the moments of loneliness and regret when he looked at the photos of Terrence that I sent him the first few years after he left. I kept them all, he said quietly. Every photo, every letter, in a special box that was always with me wherever I went. Why didn't you ever answer? I asked, unable to hold back the question that had plagued me for years. First, out of pride, Rowan admitted, I convinced myself that I'd made the right choice, that I should go my own way. Then, out of shame, too much time had passed, and I didn't know what to say, how to explain my silence, and then you stopped writing. I realized it was pointless. I sighed. Besides, I'd met Walter. He was a good man, Rowan, a real trustworthy man. He loved me and took Terrence in like family. I'm glad, Rowan said sincerely. I'm glad you had a good life. You deserved it. And now? I looked him in the eye. Why are you back now, after all these years? Rowan was silent for a long time, as if he was searching for an answer to that question. I guess. I finally realized that running away doesn't solve problems, that no matter where I went, no matter what incredible places I saw, a part of me always stayed here in Parisburg, with you, and that maybe it was time to stop running and try to fix what could still be fixed. I nodded, accepting his answer. We fell silent again, but now there was no awkwardness in that silence, just a quiet acceptance of the past and the present. What are we going to do about Terrence? I finally asked, returning to the main problem. I'm afraid for him, Rowan. This woman, she's changing him, and not for the better. I've noticed, Rowan frowned. She has some kind of power over him. It's as if he's afraid of disappointing her or making her angry. Exactly. I leaned forward. He'd always been so independent, so sure of himself. And now he's like a shadow around her, always looking back at her before he says or does anything. A classic case of emotional control. Rowan said thoughtfully, I've seen it in my travels. In some cultures, it's almost the norm for wives to control their husbands completely, isolating them from family, friends, all of their former surroundings. But what can we do? I felt helpless. He's a grown man. We can't just get him out of there. No, Rowan agreed. But we can be there for him. Show him that there's another way, that he doesn't have to live the way she dictates. He won't listen. I shook my head. Especially now, after what happened today. He'll probably never forgive himself for hitting me. And that's good for her. The more guilt he feels, the easier it is for her to manipulate him. Then we'll have to be patient. Rowan covered my hand with his, and persistent. Not to push him, but not to back down. Show him that we're here, that we love him no matter what. We? I looked at him questioningly. Are you going to be a part of this? If you let me, he met my gaze. I know I don't deserve a place in your life, that I've missed out on too much. But if there's even the slightest chance of helping our son, I want to try. I stare at him for a long time. This man who was once the center of my universe, who broke my heart, and now is back, trying to glue together the shards of the past. Older, grayer, with wrinkles around his eyes, but still with the same look. Straight, honest, determined. Okay, I said at last. Let's give it a try. Together. Rowan squeezed my hand, and there was more understanding and support in that simple gesture than in any words. Thank you, Becky. For a second chance I don't deserve. This isn't about you. I shook my head. It's about Terrence. He's always come first for me, and that hasn't changed now. If there's even the slightest chance of getting him back, I'd cooperate with the devil. And I'm just a prodigal husband. Rowan smiled slightly. It's not so terrible, is it? We'll see about that, I smiled back. We talked until almost midnight, reminiscing about the past, discussing the present, making plans for the future, not as ex-spouses who had decided to reconnect, but as two people bound together by a shared history and a shared concern for their son. When Rowan finally left, promising to call tomorrow, I stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the empty street. Something had ended today, the illusion that my son was still the caring boy I knew. But something had also begun, a new phase, a new struggle for his soul. And this time, I wasn't alone. The thought of it was strangely comforting, despite all the pain and bitterness of the previous evening. It had been a week since that ill-fated Saturday, but I could still feel the phantom pain on my cheek, as if Terrence's palm was still burned into my skin. The physical pain was long gone, but the mental wound remained open and sore. I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind, the shock, the disbelief, and then the worst of it. The look of triumph in Prudence's eyes when she'd said those words. I'm in charge in this house. In this house, my house, where every object held the history of my family, where I'd raised Terrence, where most of my life had been spent. And now, some woman who had come into our lives a few years ago was claiming rights to it all, including my son. For the first 2 days after the incident, I hardly left the house, didn't even open the shop. I sat in the living room, staring at one point, going over in my mind everything that had gone wrong. Where had I gone wrong? When had I missed the moment when my daughter-in-law had begun to gain such power over Terrence? Should I have noticed the signs sooner, intervened, done something? Rowan called every day, sometimes came over, bringing groceries, cooking dinner, just sitting there, not demanding to talk. His presence was oddly comforting. Not because some old feelings came back to life in me, that train was long gone. It was just easier not to be alone with the pain, to share it with someone who loved Terrence too, albeit in his own way. On the third day, I forced myself to get up, get dressed, and open the shop. Life went on, and there was no point in hiding from it. Besides, work had always been my salvation. When you immerse yourself in the world of antique things, each of which holds its own story, your own problems recede into the background. On the morning of the fourth day, as I laid out the new arrival of antique books, I suddenly realized that I couldn't just sit and wait any longer, waiting for Terrence to come to his senses, waiting for Prudence to make another move that would further distance my son from me, waiting for my life to be completely ruined. No, it's time to act, to regain my dignity, to regain control of the situation. And the first step was to realize who I was dealing with. Who is Prudence Abbott, really? What kind of person hides behind the perfect facade? I closed up shop at lunchtime and headed to the city library. There, the periodicals department housed back issues of local newspapers from the past decades, as well as access to databases of national publications. If Prudence was ever in the news, and I suspected that with her love of publicity, it was likely I'd find that information. The librarian, Mrs. Pinkerton, greeted me with surprise. I had rarely visited the library since Walter died. Too many memories of our visits to the place together. Rebecca, what a pleasant surprise. She adjusted her glasses on her nose. What can I do for you? I need access to the periodical archives, I replied. In particular, I'm interested in any mention of Prudence Abbott in the last 10 to 15 years or so. Mrs. Pinkerton thought for a moment. Abbott, that's your son's wife, isn't it? That spectacular young woman? Yes, that's the one, I said neutrally. Researching family history? The librarian sounded curious. Something like that, I said evasively. I just want to get to know my sister-in-law better. Mrs. Pinkerton nodded, though there was a look of doubt in her eyes. Well, follow me. I'll show you how to use our new digital system. Everything's been digitized for the last 30 years, so it should be pretty easy to search. She led me into a separate room with several computers, showed me how to operate the search engine, and left me alone. I typed in Prudence Abbott's name and hit search. There were an unexpected number of results. Prudence, as I suspected, loved being the center of attention. Photos from charity events, mentions in the social media, interviews about her event management agency. I looked through all of this with a cursory glance. Nothing interesting, just what she wanted to show the world. But then I changed the search parameters to include the period before her Parisburg appearance. And that's where the interesting details began to emerge. Prudence Abbott, it turns out, wasn't always that name. Until she was 26, she was Prudence Lambert, and she lived not in Parisburg, but in Boston. There she had worked for a large event agency and, judging by some articles, had been quite successful in her field. But then something happened. Mentions of her in Boston publications abruptly stopped, and 6 months later she appeared in our city under the surname Abbott. What made her change not only her town, but also her last name? I continued my search, now using her old name. I found what I was looking for in a small Boston newspaper article from 10 years earlier. High society scandal. Harrison Abbott, heir to a construction empire, divorces his wife after allegations of fraud. The photo next to the post left no doubt. Prudence was the very ex-wife of Harrison Abbott. I dug deeper into the search and found several more articles on the subject. The story was not a pretty one. Prudence Lambert had married the heir to a construction empire and then was accused of trying to transfer a substantial amount of money into secret accounts. The accusations hadn't made it to court. The Abbott family preferred not to air their dirty laundry in public, but the marriage had been dissolved, and Prudence had had to leave Boston with a hefty payoff and a new last name as her only inheritance from the failed marriage. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of the information I'd found. So Prudence had a history of arranged marriages. What's more, she hadn't just married a rich man, she'd tried to provide herself with a reserve airfield in case of divorce. And when she was caught in the act, she simply changed venue and purpose. Terrence wasn't rich like Harrison Abbott, but he had a stable, well-paying job. And, more importantly, he had a mother with her own business and a house in an upscale part of town. A house that would go to Terrence when I died. A business that was already worth a lot of money, especially with decades of collections. Has it really been about money this whole time? An inheritance? About isolating Terrence from me and then gaining control of everything I own? I continued my search, now looking specifically for information about financial fraud involving Prudence Lambert or Abbott, and I found a few more interesting facts. Before her marriage to Harrison Abbott, Prudence was seen in the company of several wealthy bachelors of Boston. One of them, an elderly widower, even changed his will in her favor, but died before he could marry her. The family contested the will, and Prudence was left with nothing. After that, she turned her attention to young Abbott, quickly charming him and bringing the matter to marriage. But even in marriage, she didn't stop her manipulations, constantly trying to gain access to the family trust funds and company assets. When this failed through her husband, she apparently decided to act directly, which led to a scandal and divorce. It all added up to a rather unsightly picture. Prudence was not just a calculating woman, she was a real fortune hunter, ready to use any means to achieve her goal. But why Terrence? He wasn't rich like her previous targets. Unless, I remembered how, about a year before I'd met Prudence, my shop had gained unexpected notoriety thanks to a rare edition of Shakespeare I'd purchased at an auction. The find attracted not only local, but also national media attention. There were several articles mentioning the approximate value of my collection, a considerable sum, especially for a man used to measuring life by money. Could Prudence have come across these articles? Decide that I was a potentially lucrative target? Find out about Terrence's existence and decide that she could access my fortune through him? It seemed too cunning a plan, but given her past, entirely possible. Besides, it explained her constant attempts to distance Terrence from me, to isolate him, to take complete control. The less connection between us, the easier it would be for her to manipulate him and ultimately get what she wanted. I printed out the articles I'd found and walked out of the library with a heavy heart but a growing determination. Now I knew who I was dealing with. I knew Prudence's true motives, and I wasn't going to sit idly by while she ruined my son's life and prepared to take over everything I cared about. When I got home, the first thing I did was call Rowan. He answered almost immediately, as if he'd been expecting my call. "Dash Becky, is everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said without preamble. I found out something about the Prudence, something that could change the whole situation. "That sounds serious." I could hear the worry in his voice. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I waited for him to arrive, I spread the printouts out on the kitchen table, highlighting the key points. Prudence's history, her past exploits, articles about my shop that might have caught her eye. Everything pointed to the unseemly truth. My daughter-in-law was not just a manipulative woman, but a real con artist, targeting my modest fortune through my son. Rowan arrived even earlier than promised. I led him into the kitchen and silently pointed to the papers spread out. "What's this?" He picked up one of the printouts, looking through it quickly. The story of Prudence Abbott, I answered. Or rather, Prudence Lambert, as she was called before she married her first husband. First husband? Rowan raised his eyebrows in surprise. She was married before Terrence? Yes, to the heir to a construction empire in Boston. I pointed to the relevant article. The marriage lasted less than a year and ended in scandal. She tried to steal money from the family business. Rowan whistled, sitting down at the table and beginning to examine the documents more closely. And you think she? I think she married Terrence to gain access to my fortune. I finished for him. My shop, my house, my collections, it's all worth a lot of money, especially after that Shakespearean folio incident that got the press's attention. But why through Terrence? Why not directly, like with that widower they're writing about here? Because she learns from her mistakes. I shook my head. It didn't work with the widower. The family contested the will. It didn't work with Abbott either. She got caught stealing. Now she's working a subtler angle, through Terrence, isolating him from me, turning him against me, taking complete control. And now she's moving to Chicago. To sever your connection completely, Rowan said thoughtfully. What do you plan to do with this information? I took a deep breath. Talk to Terrence. Show him the articles. Open his eyes to who his wife really was. Rowan looked worried. Becky, it's risky. After what happened at dinner, he might not want to listen to you. Or worse, tell Prudence, and then she'll be on the defensive. I don't have a choice, Rowan. I looked him straight in the eye. This is my son. I can't just stand by and watch her ruin his life. I understand. He gently covered my hand with his. But let me help. Maybe if we both talk to him? I shook my head. No, that would have to be me. Alone. You're still a stranger to him, Rowan. Your presence will only complicate things. Besides, this is between me and my son. I need to repair our relationship myself. Rowan stared at me for a long moment, studying me, as if assessing my resolve. You've changed, Becky, he finally said. Stronger, more determined. Life has forced me to. I shrugged. When you raise a child alone, you learn to stand up for yourself and your child. Still, he kept his hand on my arm. Be careful. This woman is dangerous. If what you found is true, she will stop at nothing to protect her interests. I know, I nodded. But I won't stop to protect my son either. The next morning, I called Terrence at work. I usually avoided it, knew how much he hated being distracted during the workday. But now the situation was too serious for such conventions. Dash, dash, Mom? His voice sounded surprised when the secretary put us through. Is something wrong? We need to talk, Terrence, I said, trying to sound calm. Alone. It's important. There was a pause, then he asked cautiously, Is this about what happened on Saturday? Mom, No, I interrupted. I mean, not really. It's about something much more important. Your wife. You're doing it again? There was a hint of irritation in his voice. Mom, I thought we'd already established that. Please, Terrence, I tried to say softly, but insistently. Just hear me out. Just this once. I found some information about Prudence that you should know. After that, if you want to, you don't have to talk to me ever again. But you have to listen. There was another pause, then a heavy sigh. All right, he said at last. When? Tonight? After work? I suggested. I could come to your office and we could go out for coffee. No, not the office, he answered quickly. And not home. Prudence would be there. A neutral place then, I agreed. Maybe in the park? There's hardly anyone there on a weekday right now. Okay, in the park, he sounded tense. 5:30 at the east entrance. I'll be waiting, I hesitated. then added, "Thank you, Terrence." He didn't say anything, just hung up. I spent the rest of the day on pins and needles, rereading the articles I'd found, preparing my speech, thinking about how best to present it to Terrence so that he would believe it, so that he wouldn't immediately shut down, dismiss it as another attack on his wife. At 5 o'clock, I closed the shop and headed for the park, taking a folder of printouts. It was a warm, sunny day, but I felt cold inside. What if Terrence didn't come? Or if he did, but wouldn't listen? What if I just made things worse? I arrived early and sat on the bench at the east entrance, nervously thumbing through the papers in my folder. The park was nearly empty, a few moms with strollers, a couple of elderly people feeding pigeons, random passers-by using the park as a shortcut home from work. 5:30. I eyed each approaching man, hoping to see Terrence. 5:40. 6 o'clock. He was late, but that was okay. Probably got held up at work. Terrence had always been punctual, but work sometimes disrupted his plans. 6:30. I was starting to worry. Maybe something had happened, or had he just decided not to show up? I pulled out my phone, about to call him, but at that moment I saw a familiar figure walking briskly down the alley. Terrence was wearing a work suit, no tie, and a tense expression on his face. He didn't smile when he saw me, just nodded and sat down next to me on a bench, leaving a noticeable distance between us. "Sorry I'm late," he said dryly. "I got held up in a meeting." "It's okay." I tried to sound calm, even though my heart was pounding like crazy. "Thanks for coming." He shrugged, staring ahead, avoiding my gaze. "You said it was important." "About Prudence." Yes, I opened the folder, but didn't show him the contents right away. "Terrence, before I begin, I want you to know that everything I do is out of love for you. I want you to be happy, safe. You can be mad at me, you can disagree, but please remember that." He finally turned to me, a mixture of tiredness and wariness in his eyes. "Mom, let's cut to the chase. What did you want to show me?" I took a deep breath and handed him the first article, the one about Prudence's divorce from Harrison Abbott. "Your wife was married before you," I said quietly, "to the heir to a construction empire in Boston, and that marriage ended in scandal. Our meeting with Terrence in the park had ended in disaster." He listened to me, going over all the articles I'd brought, but his face grew more and more closed off by the minute. When I finished speaking, he folded the papers neatly, handed them back to me, and said just one sentence: "Prudence has already told me about her past. The divorce, the problems with her first husband's family. There are two sides to everything, Mom." Then he got up and walked away without looking back, leaving me sitting on the bench feeling like I had just lost a crucial battle. I spent 2 days in a daze, trying to figure out what to do next. Rowan called offering to meet, but I refused. I needed to be alone to process the situation. If Prudence had really told Terrence about her past, then she was smarter than I thought. She'd foreseen the possibility that her story would come out, and she'd prepared her own version of events, which Terrence obviously accepted without reservation. On the third day after our meeting in the park, I woke up at first light and felt unusually clear-headed. What had I been trying to accomplish all this time? To open Terrence's eyes to who his wife really was? It hadn't worked. Make him choose between us? I never wanted that. Win back his love and respect? Maybe, but can love and respect be returned by force? No. The only thing I could and should have done was to tell Prudence myself, face to face, without witnesses, not to change anything, not that that was possible at this point, but to restore my dignity, to let her know that I see right through her, and I'm not going down without a fight. The decision came suddenly, but with such clarity that I didn't doubt its correctness. I knew Terrence was supposed to be at an important conference out of town today. He'd mentioned it during our meeting in the park. So Prudence would be home alone? Perfect timing for a conversation that was long overdue. I called Rowan to warn him of my plans, not because I needed his approval, but because I wanted someone to know where I was going, just in case. Are you sure this is a good idea? There was concern in his voice. That woman could be dangerous, Becky. I'm not afraid of her, I said firmly. And I'm not going to make a scene. I just want to talk to her honestly once and for all. Do you want me to come with you? Rowan offered. I'll wait in the car just in case. I almost agreed, but then I shook my head, even though he couldn't see the gesture. No, it's something I have to do on my own. But thanks for the offer. I'd chosen the afternoon for the visit. The Prudence usually worked at home in the mornings and often rested or had personal business to attend to in the afternoons. Besides, the housekeeper would be gone by then, and we could talk without witnesses. Terence and Prudence's house was in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods of Parisburg, a two-story colonial-style mansion with a perfectly manicured garden and marble columns at the entrance. Too pompous for my taste, but Prudence was always eager to impress. I parked the car on the street and sat for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts. What would I say? How would I start the conversation? I didn't want to make a scene, but I wasn't going to hold back. Everything that had accumulated over the years had to be said. Finally, taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and headed toward the house. I rang the doorbell, expecting that Prudence, seeing me through the peephole, might not open it. But to my surprise, the door opened almost immediately. Prudence was standing on the doorstep in a silk house suit, her hair and makeup perfect, as if she were getting ready to go out. Her face expressed surprise for a moment, then wariness, and finally she put on her usual mask of polite coldness. "Rebecca," she said, making no attempt to invite me inside. "What a unexpected visit. Terrence is at a conference and he won't be back until this evening." "I know," I replied calmly. "I came to talk to you, Prudence." She raised an eyebrow, looking at me appraisingly. "Me? What do we have to talk about after what happened at dinner?" "A lot of things." I kept my gaze fixed on her. "Like Harrison Abbott and why you had to flee Boston 10 years ago." Her face froze for a moment, then she stepped aside slowly, letting me into the house. "Come in," she said coldly. "Let's not make a scene on the doorstep. The neighbors might hear." I walked into the spacious hallway, decorated with marble and wood. The house was expensive but impersonal, like a showroom in a furniture showroom, not a place where real people lived. No personal items, no photos, no little things that make a house a home. "Let's go into the living room." Prudence pointed to a door on the right. "Would you like some tea, or perhaps something stronger? Given the nature of the conversation you seem to be planning." "Nothing needed, thank you." I followed her, noting her tense posture, her back too straight. She was alert, preparing for defense. The living room was the same impersonal style, expensive, fancy, but without soul. Prudence pointed to my chair and took a seat on the sofa opposite, her hands folded in her lap in a perfectly calibrated pose. So, she tilted her head slightly. "Was there something you wanted to tell me about my past?" Which, by the way, Terrence is well aware of. I've always been honest with him. "Really?" I couldn't contain my sarcasm. "And what exactly did you tell him? That you tried to steal money from your first husband? That you'd previously preyed on an elderly widower, hoping to get into his will? That you changed your name to escape the scandal?" Prudence's face remained unruffled, but I saw her fingers clench a little tighter. "I told him the truth," she said flatly. "My version of the truth, not the one the Abbott family was spreading to smear me. They were powerful people, Rebecca. They could get the press to say anything they wanted." "So what really happened, according to you?" I crossed my arms across my chest, ready to hear another lie. "I loved Harrison. She shrugged slightly. But his family never accepted me. I wasn't good enough for them, not from the right background, without the right connections. They did everything they could to destroy our marriage, including false accusations of fraud. And when they managed to turn Harrison against me, they paid for my silence and disappearance from their lives. I changed my last name to start with a clean slate, without the constant reminder of the past. She spoke smoothly, convincingly. If I hadn't seen those articles, if I hadn't read the detailed reports of her machinations, I might even have believed her. And Terrence bought that story? I asked incredulously. Terrence believes me, she said, her voice steely. Because he loves me. Because I make him happy, which you never seemed to understand. You always wanted him to live his life the way you thought was right, to stay by your side, to take care of you. You used your maternal love as a chain to keep him chained to you. I felt anger rising in me. That's not true, and you know it. I've always supported his choices, his decisions. I never tried to control his life, but you did. I gave him what he really wanted, Prudence interrupted, a chance to escape the shadows of his past, to be himself, without the constant reminder of how hard it was for you to raise him alone, the sacrifices you made for him. We looked at each other across the room, two women who loved the same man, but in completely different ways. I suddenly felt tired, not physically, but mentally. How much longer could we exchange accusations without coming to any conclusion? At that moment, we heard the sound of the front door opening. We both turned, and a moment later, Terrence appeared in the living room doorway. He froze, looking from me to Prudence and back again, his face a mixture of surprise and alarm. Dash, dash, Mom! He took a step into the room. What are you doing here? Rebecca stopped by to talk to me, Prudence answered quickly, her voice instantly soft, tinged with vulnerability, about our differences. I came to tell your wife that I know about her past. I looked directly at my son, about what happened in Boston, about her plans for us, for our relationship. You're doing it again? Terrence rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. Mom, we already talked about this in the park. I know about Prudence's past. She told me herself a long time ago, and I believe her, not some old newspaper article. You know her side of the story, I countered, the version she carefully edited to make herself look like a victim. That's enough. Terrence held up his hand. Just enough. I'm not listening to this again. Not in my own house. Your house? I looked around at the impersonal, albeit expensive, decor. Terrence, this house is like a photo shoot for a glossy magazine. There's nothing of you, nothing of your personality, nothing of what you love. It's all her choice, her taste, her style. Because she has good taste, Terrence snapped, and I trust her on these things. You trust her with everything? I shook my head. So much so that you'd give up your mother, your roots, everything you cared about. For a woman who only sees you as a means to an end. I headed for the exit, but I stopped next to my son. I raised my hand as if I wanted to touch his cheek, but I didn't dare. I'm not asking you to choose between us, I said quietly. I'm just asking you to open your eyes and see what's happening, to see how she's changing you, alienating you from everyone who loves you, keeping you in her own little world where she's the only one that matters. Terrence stared at me for a long moment, and for a moment I thought I saw a glimmer of doubt in his eyes, a shadow of understanding. But then Prudence squeezed his shoulder a little harder, and the moment was lost. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly. I wish you could accept my choices, my life. I wish you could just be happy for me. I would be happy if I could see that you were truly happy, I replied. If I could see in your eyes the Terrence I've known all my life, not a pale copy of him, But I won't interfere anymore. I won't try to open your eyes. It's your life, your choices, and your consequences. I walked out of the house without looking back, feeling the stares of my son and his wife on me. Getting into the car, I didn't start the engine right away. As I sat looking at their house, at the perfectly trimmed bushes, at the marble columns, I suddenly felt a strange relief. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying all this time had finally lifted from my shoulders. I had done all I could. I'd said everything I wanted to say. Terrence knew the truth, or at least had the opportunity to know it if he wanted to. It was his decision now, and I had to move on, for myself, for my own well-being. Rowan was waiting for me at home. He was sitting on the porch, jumping nervously at the sound of every passing car. When he saw me, he jumped up, walking to my car before I'd even turned off the engine. "Becky," he opened the door, helping me out. "Are you okay?" I was starting to worry. "I'm fine," I answered, and I realized with surprise that it was true. Better than okay. We went into the house and I told him everything about the conversation with Prudence, about Terrence's sudden appearance, about my decision not to interfere anymore. "Do you think that's right?" Rowan asked cautiously. "Just back off?" "It's not a retreat." I shook my head. "It's accepting reality. Terrence is a grown man. He's made his choices, no matter how wrong they seem to me. And I have to respect that. I have to let him go, let him live his life, make his own mistakes. What if he never understands, never come back?" I pondered, staring out the window at the setting sun, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Then that would be the price of my freedom," I finally answered. "Freedom from the manipulation, from the constant guilt, from the toxic relationship that was destroying us both. I love Terrence. I always will. But I can't let that love destroy me." Rowan walks over to me, taking my hand gently. "You're a strong woman, Becky. You always have been. I'm glad you can finally see that for yourself." I smiled weakly, squeezing his hand in return. "It's funny that you're the one telling me this. The man who once left me alone with a child? I was a fool," he replied simply, "and a coward. But even then, I knew you could handle it, that you were stronger than I could ever be." We stood at the window, looking out at the sunset, holding hands, not like lovers, but like two people who had traveled a long road, full of mistakes and loss, but who had finally found some semblance of peace. "What now?" Rowan asked. "What are your plans?" I wondered. All my life my plans had been about Terrence in one way or another, his upbringing, his education, his well-being. Now I had to learn to live for myself. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe I'll expand the shop. Or, on the contrary, sell it and travel a little. I've always wanted to see Europe, especially Italy." "Italy is beautiful," Rowan nodded, "especially the small towns in Tuscany. I could, show you some of them, if you'd like." I looked at him, at this man who had once been the center of my universe, who had broken my heart, and now was back when I least expected it. He had changed, calmer, wiser, less selfish. Or maybe it was me who had changed, learning to see him as he was, without illusions or expectations. "Maybe," I answered. "But first I need to figure myself out. Figure out who I am without the role of mother that has defined me for so long. Learn to live for myself." "I understand," he smiled. "And I'm in no hurry, Becky. We've both had plenty of time to learn patience." At that moment, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen, Terrence's number. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to calm down. I didn't answer, letting the call go to the answering machine. Whatever my son wanted to tell me could wait. Now was my time, my life, my choice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.